Did you ever play with Barbies? Because I don't think I did.
I actually played with gem dolls. Gem!
Are those trolls?
Truly outrageous. Truly, truly, truly outrageous.
Okay, I remember you singing that.
But do you not remember the dolls? They were like Barbie dolls, but they had much bigger feet.
They were. You were going to say something else.
No. They were bigger. And
taller?
And I only know this because I would try to put Barbie shoes on to them. And they were not working. Whenever Mom would go to the Trade Center in Dallas, she would come home with a new gym doll for me.
Oh, okay. She would come home with Beanie Babies for me when I was that age.
Yeah, it was like a 1980s cartoon about this girl who by day was just this normal girl, but then at night she would transform into a rock star. Do you remember her?
All sounds familiar. I remember her through you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember the show, but I remember you being into the show.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's probably why I became a singer-songwriter. I wanted to be truly, truly, truly outrageous.
And look at you.
Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I didn't really play with Barbies. I played with gem dolls and She-Ra.
When you say gem dolls, I picture trolls. Because they have the gems on the bellies. And we played with those.
We even had a troll fairy. That's for, I feel like, another time.
The common thread here is they're all made of plastic.
Yeah, lots of plastic. But I did watch the Barbie movie.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Cool. Sweet. Which is why this week's episode is, what was I made for?
Right, but we're not talking about why were Barbies made.
No.
But rather, why was plastic made? From Barbie dream houses to parachutes in World War II, plastic's story is a wild ride.
Today, we're breaking down plastic's surprising origins, its benefits, and what we can do about the mess it's made.
It's a material that's meant to last forever.
For better or worse.
And we've got some fascinating history, some sobering stats, and we'll talk about Green Queen Billie Eilish, who's leading the charge for change.
Welcome to the podcast that gets you jazzed about sustainability, even when the stats feel like a bummer.
One can hope.
All right, we got some shocking stats to set the stage today. Since the start of the century, global plastics production has doubled to nearly 400 million metric tons every year.
And it's only going to keep increasing. I mean, not ideally, but that's what's been happening.
Yeah, and whenever you look at the projected growth of plastics, that is the goal of most oil companies.
Right, and plastic factories are still being made. But we're here to make it fun. The world creates 57 million tons of plastic pollution every year. I'm going to give you a visual. That's enough to fill Central Park to the height of the Empire State Building. This is according to researchers at the University of Leeds in the UK.
I'm just picturing King Kong climbing a giant mountain of trash.
With a woman in a beautiful white dress.
I didn't have that visual, but thank you. No, I do. Just to clarify, globally, we produce around 400 million tons of plastic, but the pollution from plastic is
57 million tons.
Got it. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, as some people call it, petrochemicals, the category that includes plastics, now account for 14% of oil use and are expected to drive half of oil demand growth between now and 2050.
We've got a lot of work to do to make this fun. We kind of touched on this earlier, but the World Economic Forum predicts plastic production will double in the next 20 years.
So it's already doubled in the previous 20.
This century it doubled, but we're going to go ahead and one-up ourselves and double it in just 20 years.
Oh yeah, real fun.
So plastic's not just sticking around. It's expanding its empire.
State building?
Yes.
It's a callback.
Mm-hmm. And yet, it all started with a pretty noble goal.
Yeah, I was fascinated to find this out because it's become such a villain. I just assumed, I think, that there was someone thinking, how can I use this in ways to destroy civilization and control everything and be in everything?
Wow, that's... Okay.
Professor Plastic.
That's a pretty intense origin story.
Yeah, not at all what happened.
No.
It actually was really awesome. Basically, plastic went from lifesaver to landfill filler in record time. But why? Let's rewind and get that origin story.
You might be surprised to hear that this all starts with the ivory trade.
Right, because before plastic, humans were using things like ivory and tortoiseshells and horns and other natural resources to create different items.
Specifically, billiard balls.
Yeah, that was a big
one. Of all the things.
Americans love our games.
Well, you know I'm a gamer.
It's your fault.
So back in the 1860s, a New York firm offered $10,000 for someone who could come up with an alternative to these horns, tusks, tortoise shells.
Because it was expensive?
More because the growing demand for billiard balls had put a strain on the supply of elephant tusks. So there was a lot of overhunting going on, and we were running out.
Probably a lot of pianos, too. I'm serious, right? I mean...
Yeah, that was tickling the ivories. Yeah, I guess music...
Pool halls.
Well, no one cared about music. It wasn't, how can we make the symphony better?
All the arts, man.
Oh, it's all games. So a man by the name of John Wesley Hyatt
steps up to the plate,
so to speak, and steps up to the pool table and comes up with a semi-synthetic alternative.
Like a natural plastic, more of like a synthetic polymer, where he treated cotton-derived cellulose with a camphor, which is like an oil. Kind of brilliant in the thinking behind this. Cellulose is still used in a lot of our compostable products at the shop because it's easily biodegradable and compostable, and it's made of plants. So he took it, coated it, and then that became durable enough and versatile enough to create this type of plastic alternative. I mean, at that point, there was no plastic, but it was, I guess, more of an ivory alternative that mimics what we now know as plastic.
Yeah, pretty fascinating.
And not just billiards, not just piano keys, buttons.
Oh.
Yeah. And then you skip ahead to 1907, where Leo Baekeland invents Bakelite.
The first fully synthetic plastic, meaning it contained no molecules found in nature.
Right. It wasn't like a plant-derived plastic.
And he made it as a synthetic alternative to shellac.
Which, if you know what shellac is, that is actually, I don't know if it's like the sap from an insect or if it's
from
the
an
secretion.
Insect?
Yeah, shellac is a secretion from an insect, which is a really like hard. Shellac is still used sometimes in woodworking to prevent water from getting into wood.
But that's synthetic shellac, right?
No.
What?
Shellac is actually natural.
And from bugs?
It's from bugs.
We have bugs all over our yard.
You can't use them for shellac.
I'm going to start making my own shellac. You know, if we're going to homestead, we're going all in.
No, yeah. Shellac is a natural option.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. These are the things you learn when you're renovating your home and trying to do it sustainably.
Oh, I was going to say, something tells me not everyone who renovates their home starts learning about how shellac is made from bugs. No. Bug secretion.
This Leo guy comes up with Bakelite.
So that fully synthetic material is then used for other applications like electronics, household appliances, the quickly growing automotive industry.
Seemingly really great things. It seemed like plastic was going to help save us. And then...
And it did in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because then you come into the wartime and nylon Didn't we talk about this in
Yeah, a
another
little
episode?
bit. Yeah, a little bit.
I never know which things are just in our heads and which ones we've said out loud.
No, I think this made it in an episode.
I think so too.
How back in World War II, the military ran out of silk for parachutes, so they started using women's nylons to make parachutes.
Which, as we discussed in the prior episode, are plastic. Nylon is plastic.
Nylon is plastic. But then it was also used for things like ropes, body armor, helmet liners, and then plexiglass, which replaced the vehicle's windshields, which makes sense because glass was shattering and probably more dangerous.
Right, and creating this synthetic material was a lot easier and quicker to make than trying to source the natural resources in order to do that.
Right, and in some ways more durable.
Well, I mean, plastic does last forever, so very durable.
Mm.
And then fast forward a little bit more, you've got the post-war consumer boom. Time magazine noted that because of the war, plastics, this is a quote, plastics have been turned to new uses and the adaptability of plastics demonstrated all over again. So during World War II, plastic production in the United States increased by 300%. So that was the big, all right, plastic's taking over. And that's when all the ladies started having the Tupperware parties.
Right, because then plastic made its way into packaging, Tupperware, and then ultimately more disposable items.
Clothing, and then eventually the coffee cups.
I don't think initially Tupperware was not meant to be thrown away. Right. It was, here's something light and portable that you can use to store your food.
We even had a comment on one of our podcast videos where someone was remembering that their mother was thrilled whenever plastic came into the home because they recalled a lot of broken glasses and broken jars and all of that. So having plastic was an exciting thing at that time because you thought, oh, well, now I'm not going to break all these things anymore.
Big improvement.
And in a lot of ways, just made living a little easier. We just didn't know the cost at that point.
Exactly. So then you have advertisements coming out saying plastic is the material of the future.
Which is always exciting. Who doesn't want to jump on something that's the future?
Sure.
It's durable, it's inexpensive, it's easy to make, and it starts going into everything from your furniture, where you start getting lucite or easily moldable furniture instead of really intricate woodworking or things like that. You've got children's toys, obviously, like Barbie, which we talked about earlier, but even any other kinds of plastic toys that have become prevalent.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to find children's toys that aren't made of plastic these days. And there are more and more brands that are specifically moving towards wood. But if you go to a department store, for example, and you go to the children's toys aisle, there's a small section of wooden toys. And everything else is plastic.
And mentioning before, the whole reason plastic was invented was to spare the natural resources. Now we've learned the cost of having plastic be so prevalent in our lives. But at that point, we didn't have certifications that made sure that wood was being sustainably harvested or replanted. We didn't have that future knowledge.
Yeah, and in regards to plastic, no one knew how long it would take to break down because
it was brand new.
It was brand new. And so these things that were made to last a few minutes to a few years are lasting hundreds of years. And then even then just breaking down into small little bits.
And then just hanging out in our blood.
And placenta.
And placenta.
There was one more really great thing to come from plastics, and that was its involvement in the medical field.
Yes, the medical field relies heavily on plastic for several things.
And it was a huge game changer. One major benefit of single-use plastic in medicine is that it's sterile.
It doesn't require constant sterilization because you're using it once, you're throwing it out. It's like whenever you go to the doctor and you're going to get a shot, that needle and the little cap and all of that is completely sterile because it's never been used on anyone else. So I'm sure
it won't be used on anyone again.
Right. So I'm sure it prevents cross-contamination of bacteria and all of those things that probably prior to that, I would assume, were a little more prevalent.
So things like syringes, IV bags, PPE, the masks, the gloves, all the coverings that doctors and nurses wear now, that's all plastic used once and thrown away. which is great in that they're not passing infections or diseases to anyone else. It's just it makes a lot more trash.
And I've talked to a lot of friends in the medical field where they talk about just how much waste is happening and how some of it is absolutely necessary and some of it has just become habit and convenience. And so I think being able to step back and acknowledge, oh, you know what? Plastic has a place here, but maybe not here and here. Maybe we have better alternatives that are more sustainable in certain situations. There's actually a nonprofit organization called Practice Green Health that works to make hospitals more sustainable. And they've estimated that about 25% of hospital waste is plastic.
I'm actually surprised it's not a little more.
There was a case study that showed that a single hysterectomy procedure produces up to 20 pounds of waste.
Ooh. Because of plastic, we're able to have a lot more durable prosthetics and implants.
Well, and even I have a friend with diabetes who has a pump, and that is, you can only use it one time. Whenever it's done, you have to throw it out. But it's so much lighter and compact, and the technology that has come along with it has made it to where she can live as normal a life as possible with her condition. And that's huge.
And it's so important that we acknowledge those benefits.
I think that's why we also don't call ourselves zero waste, because to say zero waste is such a stretch and it's so intimidating, and it also doesn't take into account all of the necessary things in life that maybe aren't necessary to you or me, but could be necessary to other people.
We were in the hospital on Christmas Eve with my son, who had an asthmatic reaction to RSV. And everything they used to get him back to normal, from the oxygen mask to the pumps, albuterol, and it was all plastic. And I would not change a thing. He's fine. Everything's great. But those were necessary for him to be okay.
Yeah, and so I think acknowledging that, being able to forgive yourself if you're just trying to go low waste and you're like, oh, but I really need this in my life. Like, that's totally fine. There are plenty of things that you can cut back on and still make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And different things will work for different people. Obviously, there are plenty of people who will never step foot in a hospital and they won't ever generate that waste, but they might require a disposable straw to drink out of, and that's okay. We don't all need to be doing everything.
Progress over perfection. We need 1 million people doing it imperfectly.
A few more than 1 million.
Yeah. I mean, ideally everyone, but
it'd be great if like 1 billion. How many people are there?
So many people. Often we'll rail against single-use like plastic water bottles or things like that. But there are situations where that is important and needed. You see it when people go through emergencies and the tap water in your home or in your building is unfit to drink, or maybe there's been a spill or you have lead in your pipes that you've learned about. I mean, so many different reasons that having plastic water bottles are important.
Well, not to mention underdeveloped nations that don't have clean drinking water at all. And plastic water bottles provide clean water for them. And not just water, food that's packaged. And like you said, in emergencies, these are all practical, important uses for plastic.
And things like sanitary products for people who don't have the ability to reuse. I'm thinking discs and cups.
Right.
And need disposable tampons or pads. Diapers.
Diapers are a huge one. And we also have to acknowledge that in many cases, the plastic option is a cheaper alternative to glass or metal reusable versions. Even though overall, maybe it'll save you money, it's possible you don't have the money to spend right now and you just need to get through each day.
So we definitely want to acknowledge that we do things in certain ways in our lives, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work for your life. And being able to figure out which things could work is really the most important and the biggest step you can make.
Personally, I still have plenty of plastic in my life. Our car seats, our electronics. I mean, it's definitely still there.
Even at the refillery, where we do our absolute best to divert every bit of waste, things like pumps or trigger sprays or even our drums that we get, like the 55-gallon drums that our laundry detergent comes in, are plastic because the emissions needed for something that would be metal would be way heavier and much more difficult to sanitize and keep reusing. In case you haven't noticed, we are not zero waste. We are very much low waste.
Yeah, and we're not totally plastic free, although we strive to use as little plastic as possible in our lives.
Not just for the environment, but for our own health. I feel like we've spent most of this episode talking about how awesome plastic is, which is...
It's a departure from the norm, but it is kind of awesome.
It's pretty amazing.
But it's also just not. Moderation, you know? There are plenty of benefits of plastic, but let's just recap on a few not so great things so that you don't leave this episode being all pro-plastic. Okay? There's some problems.
Yeah. That is not the goal of this podcast.
No.
The goal of the podcast is to grant grace whenever you are using plastic, but also to realize that there is a much bigger problem, which we've talked about in previous episodes and will reiterate at this moment. Recycling doesn't really happen with plastic.
Less than 10%.
Less than
constantly
5%.
On the decline. Less than 5% is, yeah, like I said, which is less than 10%. So
it's true.
I wasn't
That's
wrong.
True. No, you were right. It's showing up in our blood and placenta.
Yeah.
All sorts of places, showing up in our oceans, our animals, our soils, our food supply.
Microplastics have been found at the top of Everest.
They also are learning more and more about how it's related to our health issues and our gut issues and just in general decline.
Our daddy issues. I don't know if the two are related.
Yeah, I'm not
I also
sure.
don't think I have that.
But probably. Let's blame plastic for everything.
Yeah. The chemicals involved in producing and disposing of plastic, not great.
Definitely not great. The fact that it gives oil companies incentive to keep growing.
And a quick reminder, oil is a finite resource. We won't have it forever.
It's just less finite than ivory was.
And we have really become a sort of disposable culture. I think that's fueled by plastic.
It's true, because plastic makes things cheap, it makes things easy, it makes them accessible. But do we need cheap and easy and accessible?
Right, and this is where overconsumption comes into play. This is a good time to remind everyone that everything we buy has an environmental impact. From how it's made, to how it's shipped, to its end of life. It all matters.
Not just environmental, but also socioeconomical and oftentimes mental.
And since all roads lead back to Barbie,
All roads do.
the
That we never even played with.
but we do probably all know the hit song from the movie, What Was I Made For? Written by Green Queen herself, Billie Eilish, who has never referred to herself as Green Queen. But she is one, and we respect her and love her for it.
It's funny because I don't listen to a lot of music. In the shop, we play like 1920s, 30s, 40s type music. Car time is usually whenever I'm calling mom or dad.
And when you're in the club, it's more rave.
Lots of rave. Mhm. Lots of rave music. That's the way I roll. But I know of Billie Eilish because she's been so outspoken about the climate. I remember reading about her tours and how she had water stations for people to fill up their reusable water bottles.
Since 2021, she has been trying to make her tours as green as possible. And on her website, you can find a whole list of efforts they've made, including offering water refill stations for free at the stadiums. She has vegan options at every concession stand. I don't think single-use plastic straws are allowed at all.
I think I remember reading that.
On her website, she offered ways to figure out the most sustainable route you can take to get to her show. A sort of calculator to see if it's whether you should drive, take the train, walk, bike, like what's going to be the best way. I thought this was really cool. She set up some eco-action villages where people could sort of learn about the climate crisis and sign up for mailing lists, register to vote, connect with environmental groups in that area. She supported plant-based food drives for local communities. All of her merchandise is made from 100% organic cotton, recycled cotton, or recycled polyester. And then all of her vinyl is made from recycled components. So she's really put an effort into this. She was also giving free tickets to climate activists.
I love it.
Yeah, so she's made multiple videos speaking out about it. I mean, she is very much out there saying, hey, it's up to us to make a change, and it's up to our politicians to take care of us and make a change.
Yeah, and I'm sure she's not doing it perfectly, but the fact that she is trying and that she's continuing the conversation,
and
super
spreading
admirable.
awareness. Yeah, and when you have a platform that big, it's amazing. And I wish, honestly, more artists would step up and take the same stance.
Well, maybe that's what she was made for.
From saving elephants to saving lives, we've seen how plastic's story started. And now it's up to us to write the next chapter.
Remember, plastic may have been made to last forever, but our bad habits don't have to.
Whether you're saying no to single-use plastic or channeling Billie-level sustainability, every little bit helps.
And it's something we can all work towards. Because, birds of a feather, we stick together.
One can hope.
One can hope.